Today I want to talk about the Reagan Revolution. We'll talk about the rise of the new right or conservatism in the 1980s. So if you want to follow along. Now, from the Civil War to the Great Depression, Republicans tended to dominate politics, national politics. Um, the Democrats were the ones who basically initiated the Civil War, at least in the eyes of most of the nation. So it's hard for them to kind of gain national prominence. They're mostly a sectional party located in the South. They do win elections from time to time if they pick off a northern state or a western state, but they're mostly a southern party. With the Great Depression, the Republican rule came to an end, and basically from the Great Depression until the 1980s, basically Democrats dominate national politics, and in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, you start to have the rise of the new right or modern conservatism. Now, the embodiment of this modern conservatism is Ronald Reagan. He was born in 1911 in Illinois. His father was an alcoholic, moved the family around a lot. They moved eventually to Dixon, Illinois, and Ronald Reagan became a lifeguard. He attended Eureka College and worked for WOC Radio. He eventually goes to Hollywood and becomes an actor, falls in love with an actress named Jane Wyman. Ronald Reagan was a liberal Democrat. He voted FDR all four times. Later on in his life, he would say, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, the Democrat Party left me. When he was an actor, he had run ins with communists. There's a lot of communist infiltration in Hollywood. He doesn't like their tactics. Um, Communists call him on the telephone and threaten to kill him. They threaten to throw acid in his face and ruin his career. Reagan talks about sleeping with a pistol next to his bed. Eventually, because of his anti-communist leanings and some other stuff, Jane divorces Ronald. Reagan ends up going to work for General Electric later on. And he says, that's when I realized that the enemy of the American people was big government. He falls in love with Nancy Reagan, and they get married. Now, Reagan gets catapulted to national prominence in the 1964 election. He gives a real famous speech, A Time for Choosing. Now, the 1964 election seems like a low point for conservatives, and it is. Barry Goldwater gets trounced. But what ends up happening is this gets a lot of grassroots workers going. Basically, even though they got beat, they're building a movement, and Ronald Reagan is the culmination of that movement. He runs for governor in 1966 and 1970. He wins in California. He clashes with the youth culture. Berkeley college students strike. They shut down the college. Reagan said, I believe that where any group's rights are being imposed upon or any individual's rights by any others, it is the obligation of government to protect those constitutional rights at the point of a bayonet if necessary. So Reagan basically tries to shut down the strike. Reagan tries to run for president in 1976, but Gerald Ford wins the Republican nomination. Now, Reagan probably not would have been possible without the rise of conservatism. It's often worried about as often referred to as the new right, worried about the size of government, student radicals, communism, feminism. Reagan saw big government and the Soviet Union, communism as the greatest threats to American liberty. There's a lot of intellectuals and think tanks. With the rise of the new right, you have William F. Buckley and National Review, you have Milton Friedman, you have the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, neoconservatives, intellectuals who used to be liberal but because of the Cold War become conservative, people such as Jeane Kirkpatrick, Nathan Glazer, Norman Podhoretz. You have organizational conservatives such as Richard Viguerie, applies computer technology to campaign mailing lists. Eventually, Democrats realize that the GOP has become the party of ideas. The religious right, they're concerned about the rising divorce rates, radical feminism, abortion, homosexuality in American society. There were many protests during the Vietnam War, Students for a Democratic Society. There's the Equal Rights Amendments, Betty Friedan versus Phyllis Schlafly. Now, Reagan runs for election in 1980. The United States has a lot going on: the Vietnam War, protests, changing values, Watergate, assassinations, inflations, the Iranian hostage crisis. Many people don't believe good times are ahead, but Ronald Reagan believes otherwise. He says, "This is the greatest country in the world. We have the talent, we have the drive, all we need is the leadership." He defeats Jimmy Carter in a landslide election. Basically, his beliefs are government is too big, Americans are taxed too much, the Soviet Union must be defeated. He believes in supply side economics. Economic growth comes from tax cuts, which will be invested as capital.